Not too long tonight. No promises. Chapter 7 is a long chapter. So we'll be in Daniel chapter number 7. I'm not going to read our whole prayer list tonight. I will just remind you, as I always do, to pray for families and encourage one another. Pray for our country. I would like to welcome our visitors back to service. It's good to have Jesse back with us tonight. I do want to add one. Derek asked that we would pray for Raymond Thomas, who's in Lourdes Hospital. I think this is a fellow you work with. I don't know him personally, but he said that he has COVID and lung failure both, and he's really not expected to live. So do remember that one. Otherwise, I'm not going to add a lot to our prayer requests. And also, we got a thank you note from Mrs. Penix that we sent a contribution to and some flowers recently at the passing of Brother Terry Penix. She says here there aren't enough words to express our appreciation for the love offering, flowers, love, support, and your prayers. Terry's pain-free and walking and talking with Jesus. He's missed already, but no way we would wish him back here. Thank you for your kindness, and it's signed Miss Teresa Penix and family. I'll put that down here for all of you to take a look at if you like to. But with those things, I tell you what, let's stand one more time. We'll have a word of prayer. Brother Brian, if you would, lead our hearts, and then we will go to Daniel chapter number 7. Amen. Thank you. Be seated, please. Daniel chapter number 7. Let's just read our text again, refresh our memory on everything that Daniel has seen in this vision. Again, just as a reminder by way of context, chapter 1 through 6. The first 6 chapters of Daniel is history. So in Daniel chapter 7 through the end of the book here is prophecy. And this, because he says here the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, we know that what happens here in chapter 7 actually occurs prior to chapter 5. So, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, behold, the 4 winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, had eagle's wings, and I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked. It was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like to a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it, and they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl, and the beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible, and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I beheld them because the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beast, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto one of them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me, and made me know the interpretation of the things. These great beasts which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom, and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints, and prevailed against them, till the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down, and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of time. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of the matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much troubled me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. Now, we mentioned last week that there are some great similarities between Daniel and John, and if you're going to interpret either of those prophecies, you really have to understand the other. And so Daniel gives us much information that John clarifies for us, and John's apocalyptic vision, if you will, expands and clarifies much of what Daniel sees. And so the visions we talked about last week in some great length, the 4 beasts, and we're not going to cover all of that material again. The first visions were in verses 2 through 8, and that was the 4 beasts. The second vision, verses 9 through 12, was the judgment. And then the third vision, Jesus receiving the kingdom, was verses 13 and 14. And then the rest of this material is explanatory. It's information that goes back and fills in those first 14 verses. Okay? And so all 3 of these visions, if you will, these visions come in the same night to Daniel, and he understands them only because he's able to ask questions. He's able to somehow speak to an angel. He's able to somehow talk to someone that knows the interpretation of this vision. And he gets this information to understand that these are the times of the Gentiles that are being spoken of, and that this vision he's receiving corresponds to the information he's already been given that we've learned in chapter 2 of Nebuchadnezzar's colossal statue. And so he understands then, by speaking to this one, that these coming kingdoms is a history of the world from the time that he is living for the rest of time. And so this essentially gives Daniel the information from his point in time, future, about the 6 coming kingdoms. 6 future kingdoms. The first 4 I will call the kingdoms of spoil. I call them the kingdoms of spoil because they are formed by war. They come out of, their kingdoms of spoil because they come out of, and each one of those kingdoms is established by battle. They're established by nations that conquer other nations in wartime. They're never established by peace. They're only established by one nation defeating and conquering another nation. Those are, we understand, the Gentile kingdoms. Because those Gentile kingdoms are formed by war, they're kingdoms of spoil. They are represented in this vision by beasts. God considers them to be beasts. They all follow the pattern of Nebuchadnezzar's image from chapter 2. They're formed as beasts do, because each one of those beasts is more vicious than the other. Each one of those beasts devours the previous one. And so understand from that, we see here something that is contrary to humanism, contrary to humanistic thinking. We believe that, society believes that man is progressing, that we're getting more benevolent, that we're becoming smarter, that we're becoming more spiritual, and that's not the case at all. What we actually see here is from this lineage of kingdoms, this lineage of beasts, we're not progressing as the world thinks. We're plunging ever downward. We're becoming more vicious. We're going further away from God. What started as a great golden head ultimately goes down the statue to 10 toes that are iron and clay mixed, which is, as you know, a very unstable mixture. They don't mix. It just is a picture of instability. And so we understand here this downward progression of beastly kingdoms that devour one another. They're all in this world that try to assimilate power and to assume power and try to assemble power to themselves. It starts out in verse number 4, a lion with eagle's wings. We mentioned last week that Nebuchadnezzar was often compared to a lion. In the town of Babylon, there were lions at the gates. And so we understand that a lion with eagle's wings was a representative of Babylon. We said that verse 5, a bear with 3 ribs in his mouth. A bear with 3 ribs in his mouth represented the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, and that they defeated Babylon. We read that in Daniel chapter number 5. And so it represents this middle chest and arms section of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw. A bear with 3 ribs in its mouth. This bear, which is more vicious, if you will, than the lion, representing that second kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, has 3 ribs in his mouth because essentially they defeated 3 kingdoms to become the world empire. Moving quickly, verse number 6, we said the leopard with 4 wings represented Greece under Alexander the Great. At Alexander's death in 323, we know he left no successor. He had no heritage. He had no children. And so at his death in 323, after having conquered all of the known world, his kingdom was divided into 4 parts. His kingdom, divided 4 ways, was left to his 4 commanding generals. Egypt was left to Ptolemy. Syria was left to a man named Seleucus. Those 2 will become important later. They'll become what you know as the Ptolemy and the Seleucid empires. Asia Minor, Thrace, was left to Lysimachus, and Greece was assigned to Antipater. Then we come to verse 7, that dreadful and terrible beast, which is unlike any of the others. It's uncomparable. We said this was the Roman Empire. Strong as iron, that fourth part of Nebuchadnezzar's colossal image. Strong as iron, uncompromising, a beast on the rampage. Rome at the time that it came into power was not just a superpower like the rest of these nations, but it actually was a true worldwide empire. The bounds of the rule of Rome extended from the Atlantic Ocean eastward to the Caspian Sea, from North Africa to the Rhine and the Danube rivers. It encompassed Palestine, Syria, and Egypt. All of those were under Roman rule. All of them bowed to Roman dominion. The 10 horns of this beast correspond to the 10 toes. And then we mentioned briefly the little horn. We'll not review all of the details of the little horn. I gave you many references last week, and we're going to have quite a bit of information in the coming weeks, in the coming chapters about this little horn. And then we came to verse number 8. We leave the kingdoms of spoil and come to Daniel's description of the kingdom of Satan. This fifth kingdom is the last of the worldly kingdoms. It is the final kingdom that is assembled from worldly authority. It's a monarchy. It's a monarchy that is so dreadful and so terrible that this monarchy actually declares war on God. Now, sometimes we look at the direction of our society and we look at the direction of our laws, and it seems like we have declared war on God, but we haven't. We're merely disobeying. We're merely forsaking God. This kingdom will actually verbalize that declaration of war on God. What's described here in verse number 8 and verses 11 and 12, this little horn that magnifies himself to the prince of the host. I'm reading in the wrong chapter. That's why that didn't look good. Yes, considered the horn, and beheld, there came up among them this other little horn, and 3 of the first horns are plucked up, and in this horn's eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. We know this is the Antichrist. We jump down to verse 11. He has a voice, great words. He slays this beast. The body's destroyed, given to the burning flame. This monarchy described here is a power, a superpower that becomes a worldwide influence under the direct influence of Satan. It is the kingdom of the future Antichrist. If you're taking notes, I know some of you take notes on this stuff. You can write down Revelation chapters 13 through 19. That is where we have this further described by John. These 10 horns, 10 kingdoms that will exist in the last days. Daniel here describes those, as I said, in verses 23 and 24. These later verses go back and fill in some details for us. The fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be diverse from all the others. It's different from these other kingdoms. And he shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that will arise, and another shall arise after them and be diverse from the first. So this king, this little horn king, is different from the other kings, and he shall subdue 3 kings. And so what we understand here is this kingdom that comes to be is a confederation of 10 kingdoms that exist in the last days. And this confederation of 10 nations is somehow an extension of the Roman system. It's somehow an extension of what we understood of the early Roman Empire. Now, It can be an extension of their government, of their religion, perhaps of their social structure. There's other ideas. We're not told how it's an extension of the Roman Empire. I will tell you how I think it is. I think it's a combination of those things. Now, this is my interpretation. This is not, this is my thoughts here. This is not explicitly stated in the Bible. I think it is a governmental system that comes out of a religious system. It basically becomes a one-world government that is ruled by a one-world religion. Okay? That's not part of our study for tonight. We're not doing Revelation. We'll do that another time. But this confederation of 10 nations comes out of that Roman system. We know that the Antichrist will come and he will be the ultimate ruler of that final world kingdom. And when he organizes that kingdom and becomes its supreme ruler, he will then organize that system to oppose God and to oppose God's people. He is that one little horn. That little horn, we have these 10 nations with 10 rulers, if you will. And then we have this one little horn, this one ruler who is the last world ruler. It's the man that is called Antichrist. He rises up. In his rise to power, he overcomes 3 of these other horns. He overcomes 3 of these other rulers of this confederation of 10 nations. Okay? And out of that, he then becomes the ultimate ruler of this new empire. He then, as the ruler of this new Roman Empire, he is both a counterfeit of Christ and a combatant of Christ and his people. He has to overcome the power of 3 of these rulers to become the most powerful ruler. And so, what we understand from this, and we also understand from the book of Revelation, is that there's a power struggle within these 10 nations. There's 10 nations that come together and they form this confederation, if you will, this union, and then they start to have a power struggle with 3 primary nations in that group of 10. And somehow one ruler raises up and he defeats 3 of those very strong rulers. And the leader of that nation, directly assisted by Satan, comes out on top and he rules the rest of those 10 nations. Here's how he does it. Chapter 7, verse number 11. I beheld then because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. So first thing you need to note is he's very eloquent. He has great ability to speak. Well, that's your first characteristic. I'm just going to say this. I try not to get political too often, but it's just there. This fella probably doesn't need speechwriters and teleprompters. Okay? Satan is empowering him directly. So if you have a man that's the leader of a nation, and he's got speech writers that write everything down on a teleprompter and he can't even read it right, probably not that guy. So you just probably don't have to worry about that guy being the Antichrist, okay? So everybody just relax. It's not him. All right? Now, y'all are chuckling. Y'all got that figured out. Okay. So he has great ability to speak. Look at verse number 25. We have another detail. He shall speak great words. Not only speaking great words, verse number 11, he shall speak great words against the Most High. So not only is he very eloquent, he speaks great words against God. Doesn't say he's an atheist. It says he directly challenges God, doesn't he? He speaks great words against the Most High. So not only is he very eloquent, he directly speaks against God, against Christ. He's the Antichrist, remember? Notice what else he does. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. There's your next characteristic. We'll read on. He wears out the saints of the Most High. He thinks to change times and laws, and they, who's the they? The saints of the Most High shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of times. So what do we know? He's very eloquent, and because he has an unnatural ability to speak, he's going to promote himself. He's going to convince the world to follow him, especially these 10 confederated nations that become the world superpower. They're all going to follow him because of his ability to speak great and mighty things. He's going to blaspheme God, and then he's going to persecute God's people. Because of his ultimate power, he becomes the world ruler, and because of what we know in verse 25, he seeks to change religion, he seeks to change laws, and he seeks to change the economy. He wants to wear out the saints, changing times and laws. They're given into his hand till a time and times and the dividing of time. You all can add that up, right? You know that's 3.5 years. So his dictatorship lasts 3.5 years. Now I'm going to tell you this now because you're going to hear these numbers come up frequently. Not only in Daniel, but you're going to see it if you go study Revelation, which I'm going to try not to do. We're going to have to do a little bit there to understand this. But you're going to see many times where 3.5 years, 42 weeks, 1,260 days, that all comes into play. It's all the same thing. You're going to see that number come into play frequently. If you're writing down references, write down Revelation chapter 12, verse 6, and verse 14. You'll see 42 weeks, you'll see 1,260 days mentioned. It's all 3.5 years. Okay? So he is actually given this power for 3.5 years. Then what happens? Well, we're told, verses 21, I beheld that same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. And judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, tread it down, and break it in pieces. The 10 horns out of that kingdom are the 10 kings that shall rise, and another after him, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. So he makes war with the saints. So these verses describe God's people who are living on earth during the tribulation period. Now, if you're writing down references again, I'll throw this one out at you. Revelation chapter 7. It describes a group of people, both Jewish and Gentile believers, that are living on earth during a portion of the tribulation period. Now, what I'm not going to answer for you is whether those persons are saved after the rapture, or whether they're saints or a portion of the church that are allowed to go through a portion of this time that's known as the tribulation, or whether they are saved after that time. I'm just going to leave that for you to figure out on your own reading the book of Revelation. All I can tell you is that there are some of God's people who are alive during that time, because this little horn who raises up and is the Antichrist has power over them, and he actually martyrs some of them for their faith. How it is they're there, I'm going to leave for you to figure out. This kingdom of Satan then, verse number 22 that we read, is crushed. This kingdom of Satan, Daniel says he is watching, or verse 21, he says, I behold, and that same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. He's given an opportunity, and many of the people of God, Jews or Gentiles, those that are saved during or after that tribulation period, he is given power over them while he is that worldwide ruler, and he breaks that covenant. Okay? And he says that this same horn, this Antichrist, makes war with the saints and prevails over them until the Ancient of Days come, in verse 22. And judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. And the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. So this kingdom of Satan is crushed by God himself when the kingdom of Christ is delivered to Christ. This Ancient of Days here is God the Father. So he beheld, and this Antichrist has power over God's people until God the Father, the Ancient of Days, comes and gives to Christ his kingdom, and the saints, in verse number 22, possess the kingdom. When does that happen? When this new kingdom is given to them, that we see in verse 27. The kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Sounds like that rock, that stone from the mountain that we talked about in Daniel chapter 2, doesn't it? Sounds like the coming of Christ. Sounds like the beginning of that millennial reign, doesn't it? And that's exactly what it is. Now, Ancient of Days here does not mean that God is an old white-headed man sitting in heaven with doesn't have any power. The Ancient of Days here refers to him being eternal. It refers to him being everlasting. And all of these 5 kingdoms that are set up on the earth are taken down on earth. These are earthly kingdoms. Is Satan influencing them? Yes. Is Satan trying to set them up? Yes. But Satan has no power over the sovereign God and creator of the universe, who takes and sets up kings as he will, and he takes down kings as he will, and that's the lesson of chapter 4. That's what Nebuchadnezzar records for us. That's actually what Belshazzar failed to learn, and why the Babylonian Empire was turned over in a night to the Medo-Persian Empire. That's what we learned in chapter 6 under Darius. That was the decree of toleration under Darius. And so when the Ancient of Days comes and delivers the kingdom, all of the kingdoms of the world, to his Son, and the saints of the Most High possess the kingdom. That sounds like the beginning of the millennial reign, doesn't it? Which brings us to the 6th earthly kingdom. And if you're following the alliteration, it's the kingdom of the Son. The millennial reign, Christ's kingdom, verses 9 through 14, and further explained in verses 27 and 28. Daniel has previously described the rise and the fall of the 5 worldly kingdoms, but this kingdom is from heaven, and it is emplaced upon the earth. But this kingdom originates in heaven. The previous 5 originate on earth. This kingdom comes and is authorized and is emplaced and empowered by God himself, originating in heaven. If you look at verse number 9, you see, I beheld till thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, the wheels burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. Judgment was set. The books were opened. What does this sound like? I beheld them because the voice of great words which the horn spake, and he's cast down. Look, I beheld even till the beast was slain, his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. That little horn has a destiny. And see, all the rest of the things that sounded so terrible that Daniel wrote about that little horn, including where he's given power to wear out the saints, that all happens, but that happens before he's given to the burning flame. And we know the ultimate destiny of the Antichrist is hell, the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away. Who takes away? The beasts. It's God that sets up kings. It's God that takes down kings. He ruleth in the kingdoms of earth. He ruleth in the kingdoms of heaven. He gives kings. He takes down kings. None can stay his hand or say to him, what doest thou? Their dominion was taken away, and yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. God has the ability to take down those kings and destroy their kingdom and yet preserve their life. Why do you think he's doing that? Because there's coming a day of judgment. There's coming a day of judgment. So verses 9 through 12 describe for us a heavenly throne. These verses are parallels of what we read in Revelation 4 and 5. It's a description of God's throne. This Ancient of Days is a name which focuses specifically on God the Father, but it's a description of the fact that he is eternal. He is everlasting. It also focuses us on the Godhead. When we read verse number 9 and we see that the Ancient of Days did sit, which is God the Father, his garment is white snow, and the hair is like wool. His throne is a fiery flame. The wheels is burning fire. Does this remind you of what we read in Revelation chapter 1, which is a description of Jesus Christ in his coming millennial reign? It's the opening salvo of the book of Revelation. It's the opening salvo of Christ unveiling himself to the world and putting down the Antichrist. It's John's vision of the last day. It's fire that represents judgment. The numbers here, the thousands, and the 10,000 times 10,000. Don't try to multiply that, because that just means it's an innumerable multitude. Don't put your exponents on 10 to the whatever power. The author here is just telling us that you can't number these. It's a multitude that cannot be numbered, because as God promised Abraham, as the sand of the seashore will be your inheritance. It's this number that will serve God. At the end of verse 10, he says, judgment was set. There's a set day of judgment. And by the way, he said the judgment was set and the books were opened. God's law is going to be used to judge the unrighteous of the world, and it's going to begin with this little horn called the Antichrist. God's law will be used, the books. And so we see that this kingdom of the Son begins with a word sent forth from a heavenly throne. But it is placed and it is carried out as was promised on an earthly throne. See, here Jesus is presented before the throne of heaven, and then he is granted dominion over the nations on earth. God doesn't say, I'm giving you power here in heaven. He says, I'm giving you all power in heaven and on earth. Go down there and reveal yourself. Turn with me to Psalm number 2. In the second Psalm, Psalm 2 is the Psalm of Christ's reign, which, by the way, is not fulfilled. Just use that with your amillennial friends. Psalm 2, verse number 7, I will declare the decree, the Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask of me, I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. You know when that happens? Not the last time, the next time Christ comes. That's when it happens. That's the parallel prophecy that David records for us. Daniel completely agrees. Jesus is granted a dominion on an earthly throne that's authorized from the heavenly throne. And so when these events are brought to completion, we see that prophecy fulfilled. We see the covenant of David, the Davidic kingdom of 2 Samuel chapter 7. We see the accomplishment of the Davidic covenant in an earthly kingdom, the Davidic kingdom. What was the promise given to David? See, the promise given to Abraham was that in all nations, in thee shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. God's gospel will go everywhere. To David, he promised, I will give you a seed. And that seed will rule from a throne in Jerusalem the entire world. And that rule will last forever. We haven't seen that yet, have we? You can use that with your amillennial friends as well. So that's the three visions of chapter 7. These three visions in chapter 7 identify for us 5 worldly kingdoms, and they give us a very small image of the final millennial kingdom, the millennial reign of the kingdom of the Son. Here's why Daniel wrote it. For encouragement. Think of this. When Daniel wrote this, the Jews had somewhere around 14 to 16, maybe 18 years of captivity left in Babylon. I mean, they had watched their own nation crumble. And after they watched their nation crumble, they were carried away as captives into a weary land where they had trouble singing, so they hang their harps on the willows. And while they're in captivity, they're oppressed. They're forced to learn a foreign language. They're forced to stop practicing their religion. They're forced to live like pagans, except for a few exceptions that we read in the earlier chapters of Daniel. Now they're going to watch their captors dissolve into insignificance, and they're going to see another nation, another beast more terrible than Babylon, come and conquer their captors. Now their captivity is in the captors of their captors. Here's what they learn. God's sovereign plan is immutable. It's unchangeable. And here's what they know. From a prophecy 140 years before, from a prophecy 70 years before, from a prophecy 15 years before, they had prophecies that predicted every one of these events, and they knew that God's plan didn't change. And what they were doing was they were watching God's plan unfold before their very eyes. Can you imagine living in a time when prophecy is fulfilling before your very eyes? How exciting. How challenging. I mean, it can be depressing when you think about your nation folding. It can be depressing when you think about the nation that conquers your nation getting swallowed up by an even larger nation. But all of this is predicted, and God hasn't lost control. And God's still in heaven, and He's still ruling from a sovereign throne. And all He's doing is working out the events on earth until He can bring the kingdom of His Son. And I look around and I see crazy things going on in our society. I say, even so, come Lord Jesus, because how frustrating and how confusing and how depressing it is to watch things fall apart. And yet I look at this and I say, how was it for these folks that were living in this time? And they were watching prophecy filled right before their eyes. Have you watched the news lately? Do you see prophecy filling right before your eyes? It's exciting times. I don't want to go back to the good old days. And I don't need to look forward to the good old days because I'm here for such a time as this. And I have examples to follow. And I have an example to leave for the next generation. And it's a great comfort for every one of us to know that God is controlling history, and He's still saving, and He's still securing, and it won't be very long. He'll be summoning us into His kingdom right here on this earth. I just ask if you're ready, because I'm watching things happen. I'm ready for the call. I hope you're ready for the call. And that's what I get from Daniel chapter 7. I'm just watching things happen around me. We'll stand. We'll sing a hymn. I pray you're ready. I pray you're as excited as I am.